Today, we're joined by Jethro Binns, co-CEO at LevelTech, co-founder of SquashLevels. He's the mind behind SquashSkills, badminton skills, and a whole host of other ventures that he's a part of. We'll get into the origin story from his Welsh junior days, just a lad from a sheep farm to a top 100 pro career, the injury that became the pivot, and then building the platforms that have changed how racket sports measures pretty much everything that's important to individuals in terms of where we rank, how we're playing, our opponents' levels. But we dive into everything from where things are heading with AI and wearables, Squash 57, paddle, badminton, pretty much everything. I really enjoyed my conversation with him, looking at, a truly social, data-driven future, and what it could look like for clubs and players. As always, this episode is brought to you by ACC Leisure, the specialist in racket sport flooring, helping to secure the future of leisure across the UK, from local clubs to world-class courts. Visit accleisure.co.uk, and by our partners at Oliver's UK. Get the gear from the specialists. So oliversquash.co.uk. Right, let's jump in with Jethro. Afternoon, Jethro. You well?
Doing all right. I'm doing okay. I bit of doubt in that I had a MRI results back on my back earlier this week, so I've got 2 bulging discs, which is unexpected, and will be putting a slight bit of pay to my squash playing and my paddle playing, but apart from that, I'm doing okay.
Yeah, that sounds extremely painful, and not what you want to get because it's your birthday soon, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Well, I think they're too intrinsically linked, right? Turning 41 and getting bulging discs. Yeah, it's been a pain. It's been a pain for 4 months, but celebrating on Sunday with a steroid injection in a couple of weeks. So
wow, that's a nice birthday present from the NHS for you.
Yes, yeah, indeed. No, it's not nice. It's just been kind of getting shooting pains down my left leg and all been a bit grim. But other than that, life is good. Business is good.
Yeah, business looks like it's been very good for you. I mean, there's not a day goes by where you're not sort of announcing the Pan Ams or the World Juniors or paddle. It's
a nice way of saying not a day goes by where you don't spam me with something on LinkedIn. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, it's not spam. It's not spam when it's news. It's when people are regurgitating the quotes that gets me. But no, I mean it's great to see, because it's, obviously both of us being Welsh, I've known of you for years, and I don't think people quite realise how you've not just done SquashSkills, you were actually a pro player to an exceptionally high standard before everything. So sort of want to visit that first before we get into the LevelTech and skills world that you've built and branched out. And I mean, it's got to be 100,000 people probably now you've probably helped in some way or another between the levels and the skills.
Yeah, I'd hope more, in all honesty. If you think about there's 110,000 followers on Facebook, so if you assume that each of them's learned something from a video along the way, and that's only probably a fraction of people that have watched or followed over the years, and with obviously YouTube and Instagram and the social reach. So no, it's something I'm very proud of. I think SquashSkills has been instrumental is the wrong word, but it kind of changed the way that squash coaching was delivered. I think we were kind of ahead of the curve in terms of the online coaching concept back in 2011 when we launched. There was a bit of tennis coaching on YouTube, but beyond that, there wasn't a huge amount going on. So now I like to think we've helped a lot of squash players. Kind of certainly, I always have a caveat where we say we've helped like loads and loads of people improve their understanding of the game. So whether that translates to actually getting better, that's a different thing. But I like to think that they at least understand the game better as a product of SquashSkills. So yeah, it's been a journey.
No, it certainly has, and I want to go right back to the start. So how did you get involved in squash in the first place as a junior?
My dad had just started playing friendly matches with a family friend, And then I think I went and hit with him a little bit. But then another family friend, guy called Gareth Edwards, he was a coach up at Cannons in London, and he was the Welsh under-12s national coach. So he used to go and coach Monday to Thursday in London, and then we'd come back, and he used to give me a free coaching lesson every Friday from the age of 7. So it started off with my dad and him playing his friend Richard, and then these kind of coaching lessons with Gareth once a week. And then it just kind of, I fell in love with it. Obviously got reasonably good from a young age at 7, and then Gareth was the under-12s coach. So I think by 9, I was in the Welsh. I was going to Welsh squads, kind of snuck in a little bit to the under-12s, and then by 10, I think I won the Welsh under-12s at 10, and that was kind of that was the in then. So I mean, I grew up on a sheep farm on outside of Abergavenny, and Abergavenny Leisure Centre was 4 or 5 miles away. So it was a funny one because I wasn't somebody that was just kind of living down at Newport Squash Club or just hanging out at the club. And that's, like the Rob Sutherlands and those guys, that it's Chris Scott's, my era, just hung out at Squash Club all the time. But I think it was always an effort. But fortunately, my dad was super committed to making the effort. So there was good coaching with Gareth, then got involved with Matthew Crowley, who then became my coach kind of 10, 11. But yeah, just really supportive parents. But it was a mission from the sheep farm in Abergavenny. It was a different one to just kind of playing loads of 3/4 court and hanging out at the club, which maybe meant that every session mattered to some extent, perhaps. I don't know. But yeah, that was it. And just, got good. And then everything became pretty focused towards squash, I guess. When everyone else was into football, I was the odd one who was, squash is my sport, as a little 9, 10, 11-year-old. But that was it.
Were you the kid going into school when you have to do like show and tell for your GCSEs and what's your favourite sport or what do you want to be when you grow up? And everybody's got like the army or doctor, and there's you going squash.
Quite possibly. I do remember getting a funny look. I still remember it to this day, having an argument with a guy called Thomas Holland, who was 10 years old, and he was like, "I bet you prefer squash to football, don't you?" As if I'm an idiot for it. I was like, "Yeah, I do actually." But it just stuck with me as a 10-year-old. So obviously it was an odd thing because everybody in school loved football, right? And I just was this odd kid who was just really into this like one-on-one sport. So that's what I started.
Obviously, being Welsh, it's football or rugby, isn't it? So squash is very much out there.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. But I do look back so fondly of that Welsh scene in those early days when squash was heyday then, right? So that would have been early 90s, and we had the boom in the 80s, but squash clubs were still riding high then, and that junior community, going down to the Carmarthen Junior Open or the Maesteg Junior Open, like particularly on like a Six Nations weekend, and you just have like this club full of like, it felt like hundreds of people. Maybe it was 90, 80, 90, I don't know, but all the age groups were kind of 16, 32 draws, and there was hundreds of players in like the Carmarthen Junior Open, but there was such a buzz. So it was a really cool, like the Welsh scene was a fun place to be, I guess. And there was a real camaraderie amongst all the players and parents and the social scene with it. But, some of those clubs just, don't exist anymore, right? It's a different ecosystem, I think, in Wales now compared to how it was. It was very vibrant. But yeah, I felt very lucky to be a part of that back in the early days.
Yeah, certainly 90s, and well, for me it was sort of the noughties mainly for me, but still, yeah, like you say, remembering those tournaments of 100+ odd kids in age groups is like I say, different landscape now, but the social aspect of it is exceptionally enjoyable. Yeah. And then you went pro. You got to top 100, top 80, wasn't it?
Yeah, 80. I always forget if it's 84 or 86. I think Squash Info says 84, so I'll take that. But yeah, it was annoying because that was when I tore my hamstring off my pelvis as I just got to 84. So I was the biggest mover in the world for that year on the PSA tour. So I'd gotten up more than anybody else in the last 12 months. I was on a decent trajectory, but then obviously ripped my hamstring off my pelvis, which meant 7 months off tour. Managed to come back, actually had quite a good first tournament back. But then nothing quite, one side was tighter than the other, but constantly had back and hip problems and it's had a bit of a crappy year. So I feel like I was never going to be top 10 in the world, but I'd like to think I could have got top 40, top 50 potentially. All the trajectory that I was on and the people I was kind of competing with. But that got kind of cut short as a product of the injury. But it was definitely a silver lining, because if that hadn't have happened then Squash Skills wouldn't have happened, and then probably I could have gone on to be a journeyman pro and maybe gone and done some coaching in America or whatever it is. So keep looking back at that kind of turning point, and I wouldn't change it, as painful as it was, as horrible as it was. That sent me off on this path, which is now skills and levels and racket sports tech, and it all came down from that injury, which is funny. But yeah, I had an all right kind of semi-professional career. Didn't make a lot of money out of it, but certainly obviously played for Wales and Europeans and Worlds, and got to travel, play squash on all 6 continents, apart from Antarctica, and had a great experience as a product of it. But yeah, I guess my real squash success came after the professional playing. I guess some people would say, top 100 in the world is a success, but it doesn't necessarily feel like that when you're kind of knocking at the door, if you know what I mean.
I mean, how obviously you can look back at it now, and like you say, it was that fork in the road that you didn't even know was there, and it sent you on this extremely exciting path. But how did you feel at 26, entering your prime, 25, 26?
A bit younger, yeah. I think I was 23, 24 when it actually happened. 24 maybe.
So heading into your prime, and I mean, how did you deal with that mentally, even coming back? How did you deal with it?
Yeah, it's just tough. You just kind of have to, right? I guess there's always you always get knocked down as being a high level junior. There's lots of wins and losses, and it's an individual sport, right? And you only get out what you put in. So I was really dedicated. I rehabbed really well, and was always just like, right, I'm going to fix this, and we'll come back. But then, it was a frustrating year because I was lottery funded. Then I had a year, got kept on with my lottery funding. Had a pretty challenging relationship with Chris, in all honesty, as the Welsh national coach, and ended up losing. He took my lottery funding away after that 1 year. I remember going up to the CAF chat, we used to call it, if you're going to have a bollocking, you'd have the CAF chat with Robin and my CAF chat. And then 2 weeks later, I remember it was always tight when I did a lunge. Like I never felt completely comfortable lunging on my right leg. I remember 2 weeks after losing the lottery funding, lunging into a front corner, it was like, oh God, it feels like completely normal, like my movement came back. So I always felt a bit shortchanged by not having another year of lottery funding after the kind of rehab year. So it was kind of tough, but just, also you're 25 and all your mates are off in proper jobs and starting to earn some decent money, and you're scrabbling around on putting in a loss for your tax return, year after year with kind of 10 grand turnover and 2 grand loss or whatever. You kind of like, must be more to life than airports and squash courts as well at that stage. So it was, swings and roundabouts. It was obviously tough, but then quite quickly, I think that was the June. Yeah, the CAF chat was just after I got back from Glastonbury, actually. So that was June, and then by the November, so 4 months later, it kind of this concept of squash skills had arisen. So it wasn't a particularly long window between ending professional career and suddenly having this new exciting thing to get teeth stuck into.
I say 4 months, that's a very quick turnaround. So when did you sort of realize you could do, contribute above just playing?
Kind of just fell into it. Oh, actually, hang on. Maybe I'm a year out here. No, I am a year out. So it was 15 months. And in that period, I was doing some coaching. But then I was spending time with a family friend, John, who had started playing tennis. And his son had started playing tennis, and he was watching some videos on YouTube. And then he was like, can't we do this with you in squash? And kind of thought, oh, I never really thought about it. But that was where it started. So he had a camera, and then we went down and did some testing on the squash court. And I mean, it was all terrible at the beginning. But yeah, that happened within that year. So sorry, I'm getting my timeline slightly mixed up. But it wasn't, still a relatively quick transition from, right, pro squash, now how am I going to earn some money? Let's do some squash coaching. So that was working with Hadrian in Bristol, Hadrian Stiff, as his kind of assistant. And in that timeline, then this idea of SquashSkills kind of got developed.
So how long did it take you from shooting your little videos on a court with John to sort of going, right, we're going to build an app, we're going to build a platform? And because you've got thousands of videos on there.
We set up the company. I'm pretty sure I registered the company in November. And did the thing at Canary Wharf in March, the standing on the Swiss ball. And that's where we filmed with Pete Nick. And then it was actually in the July that we launched. But I think there was probably 7 or 8 months from kind of, registering the company to going live. I can't remember exactly when we first did that test video. But yeah, it was, under a year. But it was terrible. Like the early stuff, like stood there in a shirt, like being so nervous in front of camera, having a can of Foster's off screen just to try and relax me. Like it was so silly looking back on it, and just like these ridiculous grades and black and white. And it's just didn't have a clue what we're doing. But there was obviously nobody else in the space. There was nothing to really kind of benchmark against. So it seemed quite good. And then I had a relationship with Pete Nicol through Prince. So he was kind of managing my sponsorship at that point. And then I said to him, look, I've got this idea. Do you want to do some videos together? Let's do some filming. So we filmed with him during the day at Canary Wharf before I did my world record attempt. And then as a product of that, we had 40 videos from greatest players of all time, supplemented with the stuff from me as a kind of 24-year-old, like ex-squash pro who got to 86 in the world. But I think I have a good way of explaining things and was able to. So Pete gave that instant credibility. And then we had that platform through Prince, and relationship with PSA guys meant that we could have some squash TV footage in there, which kind of elevated things a little bit further. I can't remember if we actually had any of that at launch. It's a long time ago now. But certainly within that early period, we got access to the squash TV footage. And then there was obviously Pete's network, Palmer's, Powers, Beaches, which then kind of expanded the credibility. But it was just totally winging it, and no idea what we're doing. And I fell out with John actually within that period. The original founder, all got quite messy. And he basically exited, stepped out of the business, just handed over. So me and Pete took it on. My granddad had just died, so I had a little bit of inheritance. I went and bought a camera myself, and then tried to figure out how you get it on a tripod. And then Pete came down. We did some more filming and put a couple of grand into a website. 800 quid into a camera and a lens, and with 5 grand, kind of spun up SquashSkills with a logo, and did it so on the cheap, and it was kind of laughable at the time. But we'd done a decent job with. I think we got about 15,000 followers on Facebook and Facebook groups or Facebook page. It was quite easy to grow, but it was a good core audience. So a guy called Jamie Davis was helping with that as a concept. So we grew that audience. And then the day we went live, I think we did it was like 48 subs or something like this, but they were paying 99 quid each. It was like a special offer deal. And to me, I felt like it was like, oh my God, I've struck the jackpot, I've hit gold. Like, it was like £4,000 in a day. And
you were there counting your millions.
Yeah, well, it was. It was just, oh my God, this is going to be a pathway to gold. But of those 15,000 Facebook, a few started to sign up. And I think we ended up doing about 17.5, 18 grand, I think, in the first week, which was, in hindsight, was brilliant. It was amazing. But from a couple of hundred subs, right? And that was what really set things up. And it was just, quite quickly I said to Adrian, I'm going to go full time in this. And Pete and I were just in it together, and I was just kind of winging it and learning, and that was how it started. Kind of got a little bit of funding, which meant we had some coaching, and then got an apprentice in and invested in slightly better camera, and it was all just so organic. Now knowing what I know about investment and cash and capital and building a brand and launching a business, you certainly wouldn't have done it like that. But at the time, so there wasn't really a lot else going on, and we had Peter Nicol telling you how to play squash, giving you weekly videos. It was cool.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, former world number one, he was still playing at the time. It was instant in the squash world. I mean, people seem to immediately feed back to it. And obviously, like I say, 17,000 in the first year. First week, sorry. I mean, how, I know you've mentioned it a little bit, but that must have felt really, like satisfying to be like, wow, this is immediately, there's an appetite for this. Like you said, there's nobody else doing it. I can't even think of anybody else doing it now, let alone.
I think it's unfair because Steve Townsend did have Total Squash, and he'd done some videos and put a bit of a library together. But I mean, he was before us. In all honesty, it was just done in a slightly earlier stage way than us. I guess it was slightly even rougher around the edges than SquashSkills was. So I think definitely need to mention Steve, but we kind of came along and I guess superseded what Steve had tried to do. It was like he had a platform with some videos, but maybe no marketing budget, and hadn't grown the socials so as much as there was coaching from Steve. He didn't have a Peter Nicol, and then hadn't got the social media following up to market to, and so there was a tiny bit going on there. It's just worth noting.
Have you got any sort of anecdote you can share from sort of the early videos other than a Foster's off camera?
The blooper reels in those days were amazing. There's some funny bloopers on YouTube, just shambolic. I can't think of anything. No, I mean, just look at the bloopers. That's kind of it, really. It sums it up. But it was just lots of favors, and Pete did a Legends event in Aberdeen, and then I was just kind of up there with the camera. And before they were playing, he was making, Power or Palmer get on court and do a few videos, and JP in his big baggy t-shirt just looked quite a bit weight at the time, and just looked like this kind of totally disheveled character, just being classic JP. Like, just get there and do this, and it was just really funny looking back on it. But yeah, so also unprofessional, but yeah, it's good. It worked.
And then from there, you've done SquashLevels, which has totally changed pretty much everything in the squash world. I saw you post the other day, like, that one person's checked it like 600 times in a year, which I'm not going to lie, it might be me, but people are always checking it. It's great for, like when we do our local leagues now, it's a nice, easy way of ranking people. Like if we've had 4 people join our club this year who just go, right, where's your rank? It's right, you're going to be there, but you can play that person just to make sure, but it's just immediate bang, that's where you are. It's just so easy.
Yeah, it's great. And I definitely can't take credit for the maths. That's Richard. So Richard Bickers is the the original founder of SquashLevels, and I always describe them as the brains behind the operation. So I think he got going with the algorithm in 2015, and then I used to coach his son actually way back when I was working with Hadrian then. So then in 2019, I kept hearing bits about the traction SquashLevels was getting. In a few counties it had been picked up, and Richard kind of shed some light on some of the engagement stats. And because we'd gone in to look at how we could measure playing level using kind of testing, like can we map skills-based testing to level, was basically the concept and the initial conversation. And then Richard kind of let me into a bit of detail on some of the insight and the obsession. I was like, bloody hell, there's a really interesting business in here. I said, let me help you out, because he had like England Squash were actually paying him to deliver a bit of membership benefit. It was like £1 a player. So I think there was like a 20k slush fund that Richard had sat in SquashLevels. And I said, look, let me get involved here. I know how I can turn this into a commercially viable business. I've done it with online squash coaching. We can definitely do it with this. So we went through a rebrand, totally stripped out half the data probably just made, because it was like Richard is a data man and there's data everywhere and always too much. And then I always joke that his inspiration for branding came from the Microsoft paperclip back in the day. So it's like, come and speak to this agency. Let's go through a rebrand. Let's turn it into a subscription business. Because he was charging £5 a year. You could pay £5 a year on PayPal, no renewals. And that was kind of how he was doing it. So you could pay £5 and you get your data. So right, we're ripping this up. And that was it. So we did all this work. So obviously it's a system that relies on match results coming into it for it to work. And then we launched a week before COVID. And so everything just stopped. And it was like, we've really tried hard here. But actually it was a blessing in disguise, because then through COVID, I was running quite a lot. I was using Strava. Richard wasn't getting constant complaints from people about them having dodgy knees and this was an injury, and the inbox was quiet. So we set about turning it into a social component or social platform, like taking inspiration from Strava. And it was the realization that if Strava uses the little blue dot, which is GPS tracking to get your data into here, and then it builds a social network around that, we could do exactly the same thing with match results. So the match results, your little blue dot, effectively pulling data into the system. And then if we can build a social component, your feed, your ability to follow your friends, see what's going on. So that's kind of what we did. And I still don't think we've nailed that at all, really, the social side. We're actually going to go into a really significant development phase now over the next 3 or 4 months, where everything's going to get far more gamified, far more social, celebrate, time on court, 100th match, 500th match, trying to bring in heart rate data, gamification, time in red zones, max heart rate, all this kind of stuff. So rather than, I keep saying that I think one of the limitations of the social side of the platform at the moment is if Jethro plays Shaun and then we're both mates with Lewis and you beat me, Lewis isn't necessarily going to go and comment and say, well done, Shaun, great win, because I'm going to feel a bit upset and a bit pissed off about it, right? Because it's so binary with win and loss. But actually, if we're able to go, Shaun spent 40 minutes in zone 4, or Jethro's heart rate hit 195, or, Shaun's played his 500th match, I think that's where the kind of kudos and the thumbs up and the commenting will maybe increase. So I've got a real vision to kind of make it far more social than it already is. But obviously, the main reason that people are on there is data and rankings and tracking their performance. But I do want to create this kind of global community where it's like a celebration of squash and working hard and training and all that kind of stuff. If we can pull that data in from wearables or even from the SquashSkills platform, from the training app, and kind of create a real hub squash activity. I think we could do really cool.
Do you think that's where racket sports are going as well? Sort of the social, like we've seen the growth of paddle, obviously an extremely social sport. Do you think that is sort of where everything is sort of now going after COVID? Everybody's isolated. Now everybody sort of wants to chat.
Yeah. I don't think paddle's taken off because it's easy to pick up, and then there's an inherent social element to it. The fact there's 4 people on the court means you end up like laughing and pissing around more than having a really intense one-on-one match. That's not to say paddle can't get competitive. So I think there's an inherently social nature of it. I think everything's becoming more data-led. You look at Strava and you look what they did for endurance athletes 10 years ago. Nobody predicted you'd have a social network wrapped around endurance sports, and that's all tied to data. So I think it's a blend of people wanting more insight, people wanting to see improvement, wanting things to be more, objective and less subjective in terms of improvement. And then I think just, the idea of community and online community is easier now with APIs. So yes and no. I mean, squash is squash, and it's a brilliant head-to-head sport, and you have that club environment for a truly social experience. I don't think you come to SquashLevels for that social experience, but a social network to track friends' data and things. I think that's where I think there's value in seeing that data all in one place. So yeah, I mean, obviously we've got to look at pickle and paddle and what they're doing well, and the social side of things is a real reason why they've grown. But I also think it's fundamentally because they're easy to pick up and the ball bounces, and that's why we're going to be having a massive push over the next 6 months with Squash 57. So we're launching Squash 57 levels on Friday, working closely with World Squash Federation, with Mike Harris at UK Racquetball. Mike, you need a rebrand. Can't have UK Racquetball in Squash 57. But he knows that. So, I think the whole brand identity of Squash 57 needs sorting out. But I do think the bouncier ball, the shorter racket, similar to paddle, similar to pickle, is something that's been right under our noses in the squash world that we can lean into. So I really hope we do embrace Squash 57. Still work to do with squash and just using the right ball in a bouncier ball. But yes, I still think Squash 57 could really play a role in the squash ecosystem, and we're going to be pushing that really hard. It'll be nice having the Squash 57 platform, and if we can get box leagues going in new countries where they haven't played Squash 57 before and just start local, but hopefully just get more people onto the court, just having rallies without having to worry about warming a double yellow dot up in December in Abergavenny Leisure Centre. Let's just go, no, this is your route in. This is the easy way. Now go and chase a ball around. So I think that will play a big part in, it's not just the social element of paddle and pickle that mean it's grown. I think it's the ease and the social element combined. So that's my take on it.
No, I say it's all. I think it's a lot to do with literally what you just said. It's easy to pick up and it's sociable. And now, obviously, like you said, you've got Squash 57 launching Friday the 17th. Yeah. You've got paddle levels launched at the start of this year.
Yeah.
Any other levels in the pipeline? Because I mean, you've got badminton skills, which we'll touch on as well. But
yeah,
it just seems to be getting bigger.
Yeah, badminton's, we're going to spin up that platform pretty soon. Just to sit alongside badminton skills as well, because we're going out there and having conversations with federations and showcasing the product. So I think it's it just makes sense to have those two side by side. I mean, we're already in conversations with different federations and organisations in badminton, but I actually think just having the platform in front of them, just going, yeah, here it is, makes sense. So we will spin that up. Tennis levels actually does exist. We've got the platform. There's a couple of clubs using it, using box leagues. But UTR is in the space, and World Tennis Number. I think they're already competing for with each other. So I'm less concerned about going back. I think we've got to pick our battles, right? So for me, it's Squash 57 to show we can do another sport, paddle to show we can do double. And paddle's a wide open goal. It's like the Wild West at the moment, and it is a gold rush. There's lots of people vying for the space. But I think we've got to run hard at paddle, and I'm playing quite a lot of paddle and enjoy it. And we've got some really good relationships here in the UK. So, and some big booking platforms that we're about to announce doing their ratings engine. So I feel like we've got a pretty good foothold in paddle. And then badminton is just massive. Like, it's the second largest participation sport in the world. It's a huge market. I mean, predominantly in Asia, but it's 380 million players. We just can't comprehend it from a squash standpoint. So that, I'm actually speaking to table tennis as well at the moment. So we're chucking mud at walls and seeing what sticks.
What's pushed you to sort of do all the, because we just did squash. Paddle wasn't really that big when you would have been playing squash. What's pushed you to go into all the different racket sports?
You want the honest answer? I mean,
I think I'm going to know what the honest answer is now that you said that.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's very hard to create a scalable tech business or an investable business in squash, like that scales up purely. If you're going to be purely focused on a single sport, it's tough, right? Because there's a limited audience size and a limited market. So, we know we've got a great product, and we know it can deliver value and support, other sports. But we have to deliver a great squash product, and to have a team of 12 employees, which is where we're at in Levels at the moment, to sustain that kind of burn. You've got to generate proper revenue. And at the moment we're doing that off investment and grant funding, but to get investment and grant funding, you have to have a large user base. It can't just be a squash audience. So it's all linked to growth and audience sizes. And obviously paddle is fastest growing sport in the world as well, right? So there's an exciting opportunity there. So it is, I would be lying if I said it wasn't financially driven, right? If we wanted to, Richard and I could have created a nice lifestyle business by just sticking around in squash and the two of us doing that. But actually, you probably need, it would be tough to do it too, just because of the volumes of data and onboarding. And, so to service the squash world properly, you need a team. You need data scientists, you need back-end developers, you need front-end developers, you need commercial leads, you need customer support. Just to kind of deliver the service that we are delivering, I think you need 6 or 7 people. And then does the squash world support that purely in isolation? Probably not. So, it's a business case.
I imagine with the Levels, it was pretty easy to branch out with Richard's algorithms and everything, but it must have been trickier with badminton skills because you're not a badminton coach, are you?
No, exactly. It's all about, what I needed to do was find the equivalent of me and Pete in the badminton world. I'm not coaching badminton. It's Chris, Chris Langridge and Marcus Ellis. I was at university with Chris. I lived with him. So he was Olympic medalist in Rio with Marcus. So we've got those guys on board. And the overarching company and on the skills side of things was called Learn from a Legend. So that was always the kind of vision. Even in 2013, when we set that up, it was like Learn from a Legend set up to be a parent company because we want to do this multi-sport. But it took 11 years ultimately to go and do multi-sport play, mainly because we had a really bad build with one of the developers we used. So it took a long time to get to where we wanted to be in the Learn from a Legend business concept. But now we've obviously got Levels, and we're actually going through a merger now. So we're folding skills into Levels, into Level Tech. So it all become one company, one team, one shared goal, kind of grassroots racket sports. Levels measures your level, skills tells you how to improve it, right? And then there's a whole ecosystem within that. I think we're going to really push this idea, kind of a bit of a tour or level series. We've talked about it, having the global calendar, having all these events feeding into into the Levels ecosystem. So I think, that's where we want to sit. It's like, how do we give this kind of what was a pro experience with data analysis and, all this kind of understanding of the game? How do we democratize it all, bring high level coaching from skills, to the average player, to give this data and insight to the average player? How do we give competition experience, at a global scale for the average player? So I think it's a kind of ecosystem play that covers, there's a big gap that's kind of been underserviced, I think, for many years. Juniors have always been well serviced. Masters have usually been pretty well serviced, but there's a lot of people who get forgotten in squash from kind of 18 or 19, come out of juniors, maybe go to uni, but then what happens between there and 35? So, I think there's a group that needs catering for, and hopefully that's where we're able to step in and support.
Yeah, as somebody firmly in that group, I remember having conversations of, not being nowhere near good enough to go pro. So it was like, oh, you're going to enter this tournament. It's like, it's Masters. I'm not 35.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, what about this grade? Well, that's 3 hours away. And there definitely seems to be more popping up now. I see Millie Tomlinson's got her series of one-day events. We hosted a tournament at my club this year, and literally the first thing everybody asked was, "It's going on SquashLevels, yeah?"
Yeah.
It's literally the first thing. And I think it was like 2 or 3 days afterwards, the platform we used hadn't updated it to SquashLevels, and I had texts off people because they'd played people who were, in theory, they should have lost 3-0 to, but they either lost 3-2 or we had one big upset where they won 3-2 and there was a massive gap. Yeah. So they're like, is it on yet? Is it on yet? Because they really wanted to see the jump up. And some of them did jump up from like 2.5 to like 3.5 or 4 in some cases. But I imagine you'll probably get similar feedback when you do the badminton levels and badminton skills once they, eventually link up.
Yeah, that's the plan. It's just getting that traction, and I kind of liken it. It's a critical mass of people. Your word of mouth is what really spreads SquashLevels. You hear people talking about it and showing people. It becomes the bar talk, and I think you need a percentage of the club to embrace it, and then everyone's like, "Oh, what's that? What's that?" And we're just going from the 0 to 1 bit in the other sports is the challenge. Richard spent 10, 12 years. Sorry, started in 2015, but before I got involved, there was kind of 4 years of organic growth, him working his full-time job, but then tinkering away at this thing, and with investors and whatnot, you don't have that luxury of time, right? So it's getting, you've got to get connected up, and you've got to get people enthused about it, and get going from day one. So that's the challenge we've got. Squash was very organic, we're very connected. There was nothing else in the space. But now, you've got Playtomic in a booking platform, with a rating system. You've got other people spotting the opportunity with ratings, so everything's got to just speed up. And that's kind of why you need a team of 12 as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I say I'm very conscious of time because I know you've got a meeting coming up. What would you say is the proudest, what you're most proud of? I know it's probably like asking you to pick your favorite child, but what is it that you're most proud of at everything you've done?
Good question. I think there was a realization last week when we launched the World Junior Rankings.
Yeah.
Like with the WSF's endorsement, and that's a big thing, right? Because that ultimately means that every federation or every country in the world needs to get connected if they want their juniors officially ranked. So that was like cool. This was a vision that I remember having a conversation with Alex Goff actually about 6 years ago, saying I'm getting involved with Richard here on SquashLevels. Like, imagine a world where everybody's rated and we're all connected. And I remember him be like, it's never going to happen. You just won't, that won't happen. And it fundamentally is now. So I think that's a nice one. I think skills, just looking back, as as much as skills looks like this really successful thing, financially it's actually not particularly lucrative. Like it's okay, but I like to think that we've done a really good service for the squash world with SquashSkills, and I think we've helped more people than anybody in the world get better at this thing that they love. And I think that's a nice way to kind of sum it up. We talked that number, you talked about 100,000 at the beginning. It's probably 200, 300,000, whatever it is. If 300, 400, 500,000 people have learned something from SquashSkills and hit a slightly better forehand drive, or can get the ball out the back corner, or whatever it is, then I take, I guess, a great deal of satisfaction from that. But it's just constantly evolving. There's always a new challenge. There's always a new thing to overcome. I guess my career was cut short and I never achieved what I wanted to achieve in the squash world originally, when all my heart was just set on being a pro squash player, right? And that got cut short. So I guess I've kind of got to the top of squash in a different way. So, a very different way, but that's also quite nice, I guess. So a few different things. I mean, I'm fortunate to have navigated this and come in at it from a few different projects in a few different ways. And it's obviously a wicked sport that we all love. But yeah, it's been very kind to me. It's definitely been very kind to me. But it's been a grind as well.
I can't imagine the late nights you've put in, or trying to get older people to get the videos done, or an issue with the website, or this, that, or the other, or
to go wrong.
It's always something to go wrong. It's always something to go wrong. And then the last question before you go even, what advice would you give to anybody looking to turn their passion into a job?
Be really, really, really sure that, no, how am I going to say this? Because inevitably, when a passion becomes a job, it ultimately becomes work. So I don't play squash anymore. I came out of retirement for the Home Internationals, and I did love that, partly as a product of it being so hard. But I don't want to go and spend all my time at a squash club now when I'm constantly thinking about squash, if that makes sense. I need to go and stand in the river and go fishing. So that's an interesting one. But look, no, if you really do want to make it happen, it's just keep knocking on the door. It's connections, relationships. If you're passionate about something, then you're going to be able to talk to people about it. You're going to be able to build relationships over that passion. And I'm very aware that my success in squash has also been a product of the relationships that I've got, that I built up, the federations, the PSA, the presidents of federations from the who were there when I was playing my junior days. So I think just talking to people and getting out there and engaging with people and showing that passion, because you never know where that conversation will come in handy down the line, or that relationship, what door that relationship will open up down the line. So yeah, just being out there and being passionate and wearing your heart on your sleeve and showcasing that passion for the sport or the project. And I think if you don't take no for an answer, keep knocking on the door, keep grinding away.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for everything you're doing with levels, skills, and obviously branching out into the other ones as well. Good luck with that, and we'll be in touch very, very soon.
Thanks, Shaun.
Take care. And that's a wrap with Jethro. Well, as it turns out, it's not the end. After we finished, we realized there was actually a bit more for us to delve into. So after we hit stop, we decided, we're going to carry this on. So part 2, a little bonus episode, will drop next week. We drive a little bit deeper into AI, wearables, and a bit more the future of racket sports. And as always, again, a huge thank you to our partners, ACC Leisure, to setting the standard of racket sport flooring across the UK and securing the future of leisure. And to Oliver UK, and remember, if you're an England Squash member, you get an exclusive discount on all Oliver equipment. Head to your England Squash membership page to find your unique code. And remember to follow or subscribe wherever you found us so you don't miss that bonus episode next week. Thank you everybody for listening, and stay tuned to find out who's going to be our guest next week. Take care.